February 1964. Four boys from Liverpool step onto the stage of the Ed Sullivan Show and 73 million Americans are watching. Not a political speech, not a sports event, but it feels like something big is happening. With their unusual haircuts and a sound that grabs you by the throat, the Beatles turn America upside down. The British invasion has begun, and the youth has found new kings.
Live from New York, the Ed Sullivan Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. I think you'll understand.
But before we dive in, this video is meant purely as entertainment. It's a personal what-if scenario, not a serious history lesson, just something fun to think about and discuss together. Because while Beatlemania sweeps across the country, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, is trapped in the golden cage of Hollywood. He's making one formulaic movie after another, with most of his new music tied to those film soundtracks. Ironically, this may have been one of the most beautiful periods for his voice. Warm, rich, and technically brilliant. Just listen to early 60s records like Are You Lonesome Tonight or Surrender. That same breathtaking voice was still there in 1964. A song like It Hurts Me shows just how emotional, powerful and nuanced he could sound at this time.
I know that he never will set you free, because he's just that kind of guy. But if you ever tell him you're through, I'll be waiting for you.
But because he was no longer performing live, the voice existed only on records and movie soundtracks, and the pure electrifying energy of Elvis the performer had temporarily vanished from public view. The throne of popular culture felt empty, and the Beatles stepped in, quite rightfully, without anyone lifting a finger. And that got me thinking, what if Elvis had decided to fight back, right in the middle of Beatlemania? What if he had chosen to go on a massive tour, on stage with his band, at his very best? This is my take on one of the biggest what-if questions in music history. How Elvis Presley, with one single game-changing tour, could have stopped the Beatles. To understand how big this moment was, we need to go back to early 1964. America was still reeling from the assassination of President Kennedy just a few months earlier. The nation was craving something new, something to lift the darkness. The Beatles' performance on the Ed Sullivan Show was a cultural turning point. For many young people, it felt like the beginning of a new era, a fresh wind blowing through America. Not the first revolution, Elvis had already started that in the 50s. But it was the moment the British invasion officially began, and the youth found a new voice. And here's where it gets interesting. What if Elvis had turned his back on Hollywood in 1964 and instead of filming Roustabout, announcing a massive coast-to-coast American tour? There was no real rivalry between Elvis and the Beatles. Just a difference in generation and style. The Beatles openly admired Elvis. John Lennon famously said, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." In August 1965, they finally met Elvis at his home in Bel Air. At first, the meeting was quiet and a little awkward. Then Elvis famously said, "If you guys are going to sit there and stare at me, I'm going to bed." It just showed just how much energy and interaction meant to him. Something a 1964 tour could have put front and center. And keep this in mind, while Elvis's career spanned more than 2 decades, he only performed live for about 11 to 12 years in total. His army years interrupted his career completely, and from 1960 through the end of 1968, it did not tour at all because of the Hollywood contracts arranged by Colonel Parker. The Beatles, on the other hand, while short, were on stage almost their entire career. Imagine if Elvis had used those silent years for touring and live music instead. There might never have been a vacuum for the Beatles to so easily step into as the new kings. Before we look at how this could have played out, if you enjoy this kind of what-if scenario and care about preserving Elvis's legacy, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss more videos like this. Elvis's biggest weapon was the total package: the looks, the voice, charisma, humor, and that magnetic stage presence. Even though his live reputation had faded during the Hollywood years, a 1964 comeback tour could have reminded everyone why he was called the king in the first place. It wouldn't have been just a series of concerts. It could have been a cultural event that reignited his crown. And then there was that live presence. We saw it 4 years later in the 1968 comeback special. One single show was enough to prove he still had it.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. Well, it's down at the end of Lonely Street, that Heartbreak Hotel. That the answer's gonna come somehow. Out there in the dark, there's a beckoning candle. Oh yeah, and while I can think, while I can walk, while I can stand, while I can talk.
If he had unleashed that energy in 1964, it wouldn't have been a fair fight, in my opinion. The Beatles might still have had their hits, but Elvis would have dominated the conversation. At the same time, we have to admit the Beatles were a cultural phenomenon. 4 guys writing their own songs, touring together, giving the youth the feeling that they were one of them. It was a completely new way of being an idol, and that's where the contrast with Elvis becomes clear. Elvis was the king of rock and roll, almost a mythical figure. But despite his status, he didn't feel distant to his fans. Through his charisma, humor, and generosity, he made people feel like he truly saw them, in concerts and in personal encounters. He showed time and time again he wasn't just an icon, but also a warm and approachable human being. And he did things no one had ever done before. Look at his stage setup in 1968, intimate, raw, and revolutionary for television. When he launched his Las Vegas residency in 1969, he personally assembled his band, orchestra, and backing vocalist, shaping every detail of the show himself, something many people forget or don't even know. He was also the first artist to perform a live concert broadcast worldwide via satellite. And let's not forget how he transformed music itself. He often took existing songs and completely reimagined them. A great example is I'll Hold You in My Heart, originally a very traditional country song, which Elvis spontaneously turned into an explosive mix of soul, blues, and rock and roll in a single take.
The stars up in the sky know the reason why I feel so blue.
The stars up in the sky, you know they know why I till I know you in my heart.
The result was something entirely new and uniquely his. Without ever touring outside of North America, he still became the biggest entertainer in the world. And to this day, he remains one of the most influential figures in music history. So would the Beatles have been just as big if Elvis had kept touring? Yes, they still would have been a massive phenomenon. And to be fair, they absolutely deserved that top spot in the mid-60s. But no, not so big that they would have dethroned Elvis. The 1968 comeback special proves that one single performance was enough to put him back on top. Even looking at the numbers, Elvis was never really gone. The Beatles had slightly more number one hits during their short peak, but Elvis had far more top 40 hits over a much more longer stretch and is still often considered the best-selling solo artist of all time worldwide. He had it all: the looks, the voice, the charisma, and the stage presence nobody could match. Imagine if he had unleashed that power back in 1964. The Beatles would still have had their revolution, but Elvis would have dominated the headlines and the cultural conversation. The King wasn't just another artist, he was the center of pop culture. And honestly, for me, that's something you just can't compare to the Beatles. Of course, this is just a personal what-if scenario. But one thing I'm sure of: Elvis had everything he needed to never leave the throne in the first place. What do you think? Could Elvis have outshined the Beatles with just one tour? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the thought experiment, give this video a like and subscribe. We've got many more deep dives like this coming. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.